Truth-tellers are assholes. History of Defiance. Dear viewer, truth-tellers are assholes is a cry you might have heard from the people who want to maintain the status quo. So, it will come as no surprise that throughout history, speaking truth to power has been a bit like trying to teach a killer whale to play fetch, which can be frustrating at least, and can also have dire consequences. From ancient Athens to modern-day Pakistan, truth-tellers have paid a steep personal price for their courage. These philosophers, activists, and visionaries remind us that free speech is not free, and in fact may be freemium. The truth is often bought with suffering, exile, and the occasional fiery demise. The following stories are a testament to the human spirit, the quest for knowledge, and the fact that sometimes being right can be really messy. Let's jump in. Socrates, the original petulant pesky pest. Now, dear viewer, imagine walking into a party and you see someone who is immediately questioning everyone's life choices. That was Socrates in the 5th century BC in ancient Athens. He was the guy who wouldn't just let you enjoy your wine and cheese platter in peace. He'd ask you why you were consuming it, whether it made you a better person, and if you were sure the gods approved. His famous line, "The unexamined life is not worth living," was basically his way of saying, "You are doing everything wrong." Unsurprisingly, this didn't make him the life of the symposium. The Athenian elite, tired of being called out for their non sequiturs and other nutty nonsense, accused the gadfly Socrates of impiety and corrupting the youth. In 399 BCE, he was sentenced to death and was forced to drink hemlock, but taunted with a well-aged Macallan whiskey. However, even in his final moments, Socrates was the ultimate troll, calmly sipping his poison with pinky finger extended and telling his friends not to worry. His death made him the first martyr of philosophy, proving that sometimes being the smartest person in the room can be a real buzzkill, at least to the one who is buzzed. Giordano Bruno, the cosmic rebel. If Socrates was a pest, Giordano Bruno, a Dominican friar, was the wacky guy who showed up at the Renaissance potluck with an old-timey telescope, plus a pointed pencil-pushing presentation of the infinite universe. In the late 16th century, Bruno had the audacity to suggest that the universe was infinitely big and filled with countless worlds. This didn't sit well with the Catholic Church, which preferred its universe small, earth-centered, and neatly contained within its scripture. Bruno's reward for his cosmic curiosity: a one-way ticket to the Inquisition. After years of persecution, he was burned at the stake in 1600 in Rome's Campo de' Fiori. As the flames rose, Bruno reportedly turned his face away from the crucifix that was offered to him, which served as a final, defiant mic drop. His death was a grim reminder that thinking outside the box, or the solar system, could light a fire under others and yourself, and be hazardous to your health. Galileo Galilei, the father of modern science, and house arrest. You should know that Galileo Galilei, the father of modern science, was the kind of guy who couldn't resist pointing out when everyone else was wrong. Armed with his pre-Celestron telescope, he gathered evidence that supported Copernicus's heliocentric model, which put the sun at the center of the solar system. This descent was bad news for the Catholic Church, which had already invested heavily in the whole "Earth is the center of everything" narrative. In 1633, Galileo was tried by the Roman Inquisition and was found vehemently suspect of heresy, and then forced to recant his beliefs. Legend has it that after his recantation, he muttered, "Et pour si muove," and yet it moves, because even under house arrest, Galileo couldn't resist a little defiance. His story is a reminder that sometimes speaking truth to power means you get to spend the rest of your life staring at the same four walls. Baruch Spinoza, the exiled lens grinder. Baruch Spinoza was the 17th century equivalent of that friend who ruins dinner parties by asking, "But what if God is just nature?" His pantheistic philosophy, including that God and nature are one and the same, didn't exactly endear him to the religious authorities of Amsterdam. At age 23, he was excommunicated from the Jewish community, which is like being blocked on social media, but with more existential consequences. Spinoza spent the rest of his life with his nose to the grindstone, grinding lenses literally, and writing groundbreaking works like Ethics. Despite his exile, his ideas influenced generations of philosophers. His life is a testament to the fact that sometimes being ahead of your time means being behind the social curve and eating a lot of meals alone. Voltaire, the satirist. In 18th century France, Voltaire was a thorn in the side of the establishment, using his sharp wit and satire to critique the monarchy, the church, and the social norms of his time. His writings advocated for freedom of speech, separation of church and state, and the principles of the Enlightenment. Voltaire's criticisms, however, did not go unnoticed. He was imprisoned twice, first in the Bastille and later in exile, for his writings. His most famous work, Candide, was banned, and he was forced to live in exile for many years. Despite these challenges, Voltaire continued to write and speak out against injustice, becoming one of the most celebrated and influential thinkers of the Enlightenment. Thomas Paine, the revolutionary who couldn't catch a break. Thomas Paine was the kind of guy who showed up at revolutions with a quill in one hand and a megaphone in the other. His pamphlet, Common Sense, was the 18th century equivalent of a viral tweet, sparking the American Revolution. Later, The Rights of Man defended democracy and human rights, while The Age of Reason critiqued organized religion. Paine was basically the Oprah of Enlightenment, thinking, "You want a revolution? So, I'll give you a revolution." Unfortunately, Paine's radical ideas made him a target. He was imprisoned in France, ostracized in America, and died in poverty. His pained life is a reminder that even the most brilliant minds can end up with no 401k and an otherwise lousy retirement plan. Immanuel Kant, the cautious dissenter. Not all truth-tellers met violent ends. Some endured subtler forms of persecution. Consider Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher whose critiques of reason and religion redefined the Enlightenment. Kant's essay, What is Enlightenment?, famously declared, sapere aude, dare to know, challenging individuals to think for themselves and question authority. Kant's insistence on intellectual autonomy clashed with Frederick William II, King of Prussia, who ordered him to cease publishing on religious matters. Though Kant obeyed the edict, he continued to write on human freedom and ethics, leaving behind a body of work that questioned dogma while affirming humanity's capacity for moral reasoning. This was known as a real can-do, can't-do effort. Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who broke the internet before it existed. Friedrich Nietzsche was the original contrarian. His declaration that God is dead was the 19th century equivalent of posting, "Change my mind," on X, FKA Twitter. He proclaimed the arrival of the Übermensch, Superman, representing a future ideal for humanity to strive towards, characterized by self-overcoming and the creation of one's own values. Nietzsche was accused of being a nihilist, a relativist, and even a precursor to fascist ideology. Sadly, Nietzsche's life was less glamorous than his ideas. He spent his final years in mental decline, cared for by his sister. After his death, his work was co-opted by fascists, which is like writing a beautiful song and then finding out it's been turned into a jingle for a fast food chain. Nietzsche's critiques of religion, morality, and culture were so provocative that they're still causing arguments and slap fights in philosophy departments today. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Gulag's loudest critic. Alexander Solzhenitsyn was the guy who looked at the Soviet Union and said, "This is not okay." His works, like the Gulag Archipelago, exposed the horrors of the Soviet prison system, making him a thorn in the side of the USSR. Solzhenitsyn spent 8 years in the Gulag and was later exiled, but he never stopped writing. His courage in speaking truth to power made him a symbol of resistance, proving that sometimes the pen really is mightier than the sword or the secret police. Martin Luther King Jr., the dreamer who changed the world. Martin Luther King Jr. was the kind of leader who could make you believe in a better world, where children are judged by the content of their character, even when the present day seemed bleak. His civil rights speeches and non-violent protests challenged systemic racism and inspired millions. His famous "I Have a Dream" speech, delivered during the March on Washington in 1963, was a clarion call for justice and equality, yet it also made him a bullseye for hatred and violence. In addition, dear viewer, his opposition to the Vietnam War also made him a target, and in 1968, he was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. King's legacy is a reminder that even in the face of hatred, love and truth can prevail, though they might cost you an early grave. Hypatia of Alexandria, the philosopher who defied fanaticism. To journey even further back, imagine the great library of Alexandria, an intellectual haven brimming with scrolls that held the collective wisdom of the ancient Egyptian world. Amid this treasure trove walked Hypatia, a mathematician, astronomer, and philosopher whose lectures captivated the minds of students from all walks of life. Hypatia's brilliance and independence defied the patriarchal norms of her time, earning her admiration and envy in equal measure. Her teachings of Neoplatonism, which emphasized reason and the pursuit of truth, placed her at odds with rising Christian fundamentalism in the 4th century CE. Tragically, Hypatia's commitment to knowledge and tolerance made her a target. A mob, incited by political and religious rivalries, brutally murdered her, extinguishing one of antiquity's brightest burning lights. Sojourner Truth, the unstoppable force of justice. Sojourner Truth was the kind of woman who could stare down a room full of naysayers and make them rethink their life choices, all while rocking a bonnet. Born in the US into slavery in the 19th century, she didn't just escape to freedom as she turned her life into a masterclass in how to dismantle oppression with wit, wisdom, and unshakable determination. Truth was a powerhouse on the stage and the page. Her speeches were like verbal lightning bolts, striking at the heart of injustice and leaving audiences either inspired or thoroughly roasted. Her most famous speech, "Ain't I a Woman?" was a mic drop moment that called out both racism and sexism with the kind of flair that would make modern-day activists weep with envy. Of course, being a fearless truth-teller in the 1800s wasn't exactly a popularity contest. She faced threats, harassment, and more than a few evil eyes from people who thought she should just calm down. But Sojourner Truth wasn't the calming down type. She kept fighting, kept speaking, and kept rewinding and reminding the world that justice wasn't going to win itself. Her legacy is a reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand up, speak out, and refuse to let anyone dim your light, bonnet optional. Simone de Beauvoir, the existential feminist. In the 20th century, Simone de Beauvoir's fearless exploration of gender and existentialism shattered conventions and provoked outrage. Her seminal work, The Second Sex, exposed the systemic oppression of women, declaring, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman." De Beauvoir's analysis of patriarchy, identity, and freedom resonated with feminists and infuriated traditionalists. She was attacked by critics who accused her of being a man-hater and a threat to traditional values. Though she faced these criticisms and personal attacks, de Beauvoir remained steadfast. Her partnership with Jean-Paul Sartre, equally unconventional, an open relationship, rejecting traditional monogamy, defied societal expectations. Together, they pursued philosophical truth via existentialist philosophy, challenging norms in a world reluctant to embrace change. Malala Yousafzai, the girl who told the Taliban to take a seat. Malala Yousafzai is proof that you don't need a PhD to be a truth teller. As a teenager in Pakistan, she advocated for girls' education, defying the Taliban. In 2012, she was shot in the head by a Taliban gunman, but survived to continue her fight. Malala's story is a reminder that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about standing up for what's right, even when the odds and guns are stacked against you. Truth tellers, the ultimate underdogs. The stories of these truth tellers, or assholes as the opposition would say, are a mix of inspiration, tragedy, and the occasional dark laugh. They remind us that truth is often inconvenient, uncomfortable, and downright dangerous. But it's also essential. These philosophers and activists paid the highest price for their commitment to truth, and their legacies continue to inspire us to question, to challenge, and to dream of a better world. In the words of George Orwell, in a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. The downside to this, dear viewer, could mean being forced to drink hemlock, grind lenses, or dodge bullets. But, in the end, the truth is worth it, even if it's a little prickly. Stephen Colbert might advise us to resist the truthiness of life and fight for the real truth. And remember, to look inward, dear viewer, as one of the hardest things for truth tellers to do is to start with ourselves.